Hello everyone, welcome back to part 6 of this training series, and in this session we will be focusing on how to import direct routes to BGP using routing policies. So in the last two sessions we've already demonstrated to you how to configure BGP. You now understand how to configure iBGP, the internal BGP peering session. We've established iBGP peering session in a 65000 and also in a 65002. We've also done the configuration for eBGP peering sessions between different nodes in different autonomous system numbers. And once you've done these BGP configurations and you verified that all the BGP sessions are established, remember BGP state machine. So the state should be in established, and then we can confirm that we have a peering session between two nodes, either iBGP or eBGP. So we've already closed on this. And if you log into these nodes, for example, on R8, show router BGP summary, you'll see that we have two peering sessions, one to R7, another one to R5. On R3, we can also verify show router BGP summary. And you'll see that we have multiple peering sessions. We have to R1, R2, R4, and R6. On R5, if I run show router BGP summary, I also expect to see the same output. We have two eBGP peering sessions, one to R4 and another one to R8. So our BGP peering sessions are up. But do we have any routing information exchanged between these peerings? If I run show router BGP routes, you will see that we don't have any routes. This is on R5. Even on R3, if I run show router BGP routes, you see that we don't have any routing information that is being exchanged between these peerings. And that is how it works in BGP. BGP does not learn routes dynamically. There is no mechanism for BGP to learn the routes the same way we've done using OSPF, SIS. So for us to have the routing information in BGP, we need to perform some import and export of routes. For example, we can import direct routes. This is what we are demonstrating in this session. We can import direct routes to BGP. And then these routes will now be propagated in our network using BGP. We can import OSPF routes. We can import SIS routes. So you need to perform some route import from one protocol to BGP. And then BGP will be able to carry this routing information and share with the neighbors. So this is what we are demonstrating in this session. And session 6, we are just focusing on how to import direct routes. So we will be configuring a loopback on R1 and R8, and then we will create prefixes. Remember, when you are doing route import, don't just import everything from one protocol to the other. You need to use prefixes to specify what you want to import. And once you specified what you want to import using prefix list, you can go ahead and use route policies to control what you want to export or import from one protocol to the other, or even from one neighbor to the other. So you should always use prefixes and route policies. That is one of the best practices when you are doing route import and exports between protocols. So once we configure the route policy, we will apply that route policy on R1 and R8, and then we can verify the routing information. Is it propagated across the network? And then we can confirm that yes, our policy are working okay. We are able to learn this information in BGP. We have some BGP routes in our routing table. So we need to configure interfaces on R1 and R8. So we'll configure a loopback 0 on R1 and R8, and this is how you configure a loopback on Nokia routing devices. So for example, I call it interface loopback 0, and then I need to run the command loopback. I give it an address of 50.50.50/32, and I need to enable that using the no shutdown command. On R8, I will also create a loopback 0 interface, give it an address of 60.60.60.60/32. I make it a loopback interface, and then I enable that interface. So let's do the first part, starting with R1. So I log into R1, run these commands. Then I need to configure R8. So on R8, I'll run these commands. So if I run show router interface, you will see that we now have a loopback interface, loopback 0. You can see that it's indicated as a loopback interface. The IP address is correctly configured on R1. I can also verify show router interface. You'll see that we have this interface, which is loopback 0. Once you've done this, we now need to configure the prefix list and policies on R1 to import loopback 0 IPs to BGP. So again, I've mentioned that you are always required to use prefix list and policy so that you can control what you are exporting or importing from one protocol to the other, from one router to the other. So on R1, we need to configure a policy statement and a prefix list. So this is the prefix list that we are configuring, import to BGP. When you are configuring a prefix list, you need to make it descriptive. You need to give it a meaningful name. And then you specify the prefix. So we are only focusing on 50.50.50.50/32, and that is an exact route or an exact prefix. You can use other terms like longer or longer. You have options. But for this case, we are just importing this exact prefix from direct to BGP. And then we need to create a policy statement. So this is the policy that we are creating. This policy statement, we are calling it import to BGP, and then we can create entries. So we can have multiple entries. The first entry, we are specifying that it should be from protocol direct. So it should be a direct route, and then it should match this prefix. Because remember, we have multiple direct routes on this router, but our focus is on this prefix only. So it's from protocol direct first, and then we need to match this prefix. And we specify the action to accept. You can have a default action, but by default, normally everything else will be denied, but you can still go ahead and explicitly configure a default action of reject. One thing that you need to remember is you need to have this begin. When you configure out a policy option, you should use the begin keyword for you to be allowed to do any configurations under the policy options. And then once you've done, you need to commit. If you don't commit, it will not take effect. So you need to commit the policy option configurations, and then the configurations will be active on the node. So let's configure R1. On R8, we'll do the same, but let's start with R1. So if I do info, you will see that this is the configuration. We have the prefix list, we have the policy statement, and then let's look at the configuration for R8. On R8, we also need to do the same. We are configuring policy option begin. We configure the prefix, and then we need to configure the policy. So this is the policy. So I'll copy these configurations, go back to R8 and configure it. So if I do configure router policy options info, you are able to see the configuration that we've applied on this node. So once we've done this, now we need to go ahead and use this policy within BGP. I'll delete these parts. We'll come back to it in the next session. So we now need to use this policy within our BGP configuration so that it's active. We need to specify that these are the routes that we are importing from BGP, from direct routes to BGP. So just one command under the BGP, you can do it within the group, you can do it globally. In this case, we are just doing it globally. So I run the command BGP and then I export. So before we apply it, you will realize that we still don't have any routes in BGP. If I show router BGP routes, you see that we don't have any routes still. So we need to apply this policy on R1 and R8. So I'll copy the commands, go back to R1, exit, and then apply. If I do info and go to BGP configuration, you see that we now have export, import to BGP. We need to do the same on R8. I'll apply this. I need to copy again. So let me copy the configurations. Go back to R8 and run the commands. If I do info, you will see that the commands have taken effect. So we have import to BGP. Now, if I go back to R3 and I run the same command, show router BGP routes, you see that we have routes coming in. We have route 50.50.50.50. This is a BGP route now. You can see that we also have another route, which is 65001, 6500. But before we discuss about this behavior, let's first verify that we will have the route coming in from the other side. You see that we now have the route from 60.60.60.60, which is on R8. So why are we having all these routes? Like you see, we have multiple prefixes. We have 50.50 that is coming in from 1.1.1. We also have 200.200.200.1. So why are we still running this route from another neighbor and we've advertised it to them? We will discuss that in a few. So if I run show router route table, we now expect that we should be having some routes coming in from BGP. You see that we have these routes, they are learned via BGP. On R6, for example, can show router BGP routes. We have these routes coming in and show router route table. You will also find that we have some BGP routes that are coming in. So we have succeeded in importing direct routes to BGP. And you can see that now routes have been propagated from one AS to the other AS, and we can be able to see these routes in BGP. So before you have any routes in BGP, you need to perform route import and export. And then you are able to see these routes in BGP. So let's go back to R3. So on R3, if I show router BGP routes, you realize that this route is coming from R1. The one that is selected is coming from R1. That is the best one. But we are still getting a route from 200.200.200.1. We are the one who advertised these routes. Remember, the 50.50 is on R1. We advertise this route on R3. And once this route is on R3, R3 will advertise to R4 and R6. But why are we still having this route being advertised from R6 to R3? This is because of the split horizon feature, which we need to fix in the next session. So by default, in BGP on these Nokia devices, the neighbor will still advertise routes back to you. So R1 advertises the routes to R3, R3 sends the route to R4 and R6. R4 and R6 will still advertise these routes back to R3. And we know that when that one happens, it's very easy to have loops in the network. So it's something that we need to fix. And that is what we'll be fixing in the next session to ensure that if R3 advertises the route to R6, R6 will not advertise the route back to R3. If R6 advertises the route to R7, R7 does not advertise the route back to R6. Just to ensure that we don't have loops in our network. So we've succeeded in importing the routes. These are the commands that we've used. Again, you need always to use the prefix list and the route policies, which will also help you to ensure that you don't import everything. And it can also help you to ensure that we don't have loops in the network. So I hope this is clear. I hope you now understand how to import direct routes to BGP. And in the next session, we will be fixing the issue of route loops in the network to ensure that if router X advertises routes to router Y does not advertise those routes to router X. So thank you so much for watching this session and see you in the next session. Bye.